Hello, Nitin. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a minute to 1:15, but I thought I'd start since everybody's pretty much here and we are streaming now live on YouTube. So I'm the theme convener for this session, for this theme, English language teaching, and it's really absolutely my pleasure to introduce the chair today. I'm, I think, very fortunate to have this opportunity to introduce the chair, and also I think thank the chair for setting up this theme in the first place. So not only to introduce for this theme, but my thanks on behalf of the ELT community for making sure that an ELT team became a part of the Open University research sessions. So without much ado, let me introduce Dr. Srimali Herath, who is an assistant professor from the Department of Curriculum, Teaching and Learning, Faculty of Education, University of Manitoba, which is, of course, in Canada. Dr. Herath was actually up till June this year a senior lecturer from the PGIE, but she has been snapped up by the University of Manitoba, but has kindly consented to chair this session and has also been a very big part of Open University research sessions for the last few years and has contributed to this this year's session, this year's program as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Herath, and I will hand it over to you to chair the sessions.
Okay, thank you, Mihri. Welcome everybody to the English language teaching session of ours 2021. So this, I think, is also the first round of sessions for this conference. I think we have about 6 presenters lined up, all talking about different aspects of English language teaching. So the way it's going to be organized is we'll first introduce the speaker and we will play their presentation followed by a few minutes of question and answer, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. So if you have any questions, have them ready. You can either post them on the chat or they are unmuted, right, Mihri? They can ask questions or they have to post them.
I think they will be unmuted during Q&A. If not, of course, they can use the chat. Yeah.
If not, you can either ask or you can post your questions on the chat. If you feel that you don't want to be heard, we can make you heard. So our first presenter, that's ID 79, is KP Dineshika, who is going to be talking about a needs analysis to examine the effectiveness of language course during COVID-19 pandemic situation. Over to you, Dineshika.
Hi everyone. Today I'm going to present on the study a need analysis to examine the effectiveness of language course during COVID pandemic situation. I'm Dineshika. This is the content of my presentation. Moving on to the introduction, the technical colleges provide opportunities for those who want to have a professional qualification after their O-levels and A-levels, and this institute provide different certificate and diploma courses in English for different English language contexts, like English for business, English for academic purposes, teaching English as a second language, and so on. Among them, National Certificate of Professional English is a course conducted for 36 weeks as a full-time or part-time course. Enrollment to this program does not have any proficiency test or placement test. 4 language skills and grammar are taught separately, allocating 5 hours per week for each skills, and teachers has to use self-made materials. And due to the pandemic situation in the country, the session delivery mode changed from physical class to online class. Because of that, this need analysis was carried out to identify the effectiveness of language course during the COVID pandemic situation. Then research study consisted of 3 research questions. First, what are the needs of the learners? Have their needs been met due to the change of the teaching mode? What are their perceptions and recommendations to improve the quality of the course? Moving on to the methodology, it is a mixed method research design with 33 registered students for NCP course from 2 batches at Technical College Homagamba and 3 English language teachers from permanent staff. And data was collected using questionnaire and semi-structured interviews, and it was analyzed using SPSS and thematic analysis. Moving on to the results and discussions, the learners' main goal of obtaining NCP course were to gain language qualification and to obtain the entry requirement for employment, and it is in accordance with the course objective, which is stated as to cater the learners with communication skill needed for professional involvement. And when it comes to the satisfactions with the course, none of the participants were dissatisfied with the current course content. And when it comes to the expectations from the teacher, it is found out that the majority of the participants expect that the teachers to be well organized and well prepared for the lessons. And some of them expected that teachers to communicate clearly with the comprehensible language, use varied teaching and learning materials, stimulate learner interest, and using varied assessment methods. And when it comes to the expectation from the course materials, majority of the sample expected that the lesson materials to increase their English language skills. However, thematic analysis data found out that the preparing lesson materials for the online classes as a challenge for the teachers. And one of the interviewee mentioned that she tend to copy paste activities from some of the existing resources or use previously used one. And when it comes to the skills that the learners want to improve by undergoing this course, they said that they want to improve their speaking skills. But however, when it comes to the end of this course, they have mentioned that they have improved almost all the skills, but basically they have improved their speaking skills and writing skills, and speaking skill has become the second least improved skills during the online classes. When it comes to the level of learner interest in activity types used, language, games and reading comprehension were the most learner interested classroom activities. Interestingly, it is found that though the learners want to improve their speaking skills, there were some learners who were not interested in speaking activities. The comparison between the teaching and learning methods in the physical classroom context versus the online classroom context found out that the speaking activities as the second highest scored teaching method that helps to develop their language skills in the physical classroom context. However, when it comes to the online class context, it has become the second least used activity type. Thus, as an overall finding, it is found out that though the learners want to improve their speaking skills, they were not interested in speaking activities, yet it was effectively used in physical classroom context, whereas the limited usage was involved during the online class context. And the learners, it is found out that the learners interested in pair and group work activities rather than whole class and group whole class and individual activities, and these type of activities were effectively used during the physical classroom context, and its usage has become limited during the online class context. Moving on to the challenges and challenges in online learning. The quantitative data found out that the learners' lack of interaction as the most common challenge for the learners, and the lack of experience using limited activity types, lesser learner interactions, time management, technical issues, teachers being more talkative were the challenges that were identified through the qualitative data gathered from the interviews. As the recommendations, both learners and teachers recommended that the online classes should include more varied types activities and enhance learner involvement. Furthermore, teachers interview data found out that the teachers need proper teacher training and work site to conduct online classes. Overall, based on the analysis, it is found out that physical classroom teaching is preferred by most of the learners. Though they want to improve their speaking skills, they were not interested in speaking activities, and speaking activities were effectively used in physical classroom context rather than the online class context. To improve the quality of the course program, both teachers and learners recommended that the use of varied teaching methods to online class context and enhance the learner participation in activities. Moving on to the conclusion, this study has several implications. Teachers should utilize more speaking activities to meet the learner needs in the online teaching context. The preparation of the lesson materials, activities and assessment methods need to enhance the language skills of the learners. Having a proper procedure with proper teacher training to conduct the online classes while maintaining the quality of the course equal to the physical class context. Finally, ensuring a more learner-centered learning context. All these implications can be taken into considerations to enhance the quality of the NCP course in the online teaching context. Future research studies can be conducted with NCP course registered learners from other technical colleges in Sri Lanka to increase the sample size and to gain the more generalizable findings of the learner needs related to the course. Based on the findings of this study, it can be concluded that though the learners wanted to improve their speaking skills, by the end of the course, their needs have not been met significantly due to the change in the session delivery from physical class to online class context. The necessity of proper teacher training and online class delivery, as well as ensuring more learner participations, were found out. In conclusions, the implications and the recommendations identified through this study can be employed to enhance the quality of the NCP course program in both physical and online class context. These are the references, and thank you.
Thank you, Dineshika. Are there any questions?
Maybe Dineshika can also put her camera on.
She has difficulty connecting, but Dineshika, if you can put your camera on. Okay. Do we have questions for Dineshika? I have a question, Dineshika, if there aren't any other questions. Now, you said that the reading and the writing skills had improved. Was this the students' perceptions, or did you actually check whether these skills have improved during that time?
I have given them a questionnaire.
So it's a perception of...
And it's a perception, yes. Basically perception.
Okay, so they felt that they had improved.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, because there I'm working as a tutor for writing skills. So in my classes, I felt that they have improved their writing. But I don't know whether the other skills, but I feel that they have improved their writing skills than they were enrolled to the course.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Dineshika. I think one thing is, moving forward, you'll actually need to have more evidence on the claims that you make without just thinking about what you feel has improved. Anyway, thanks a lot, Dineshika. I think this is also a very preliminary study, but it's also a topic that needs to be explored further. We'll move on to our next speaker, that is ID80, the Rajeshwari Iyer, who's going to be talking about strategic positioning of multiple languages in the virtual linguistic landscape. Over to you, Rajesh.
Greetings everyone. I am Rajeshwari Iyer. My presentation is about the strategic positioning of multiple languages in the virtual linguistic landscape. I'll start off by talking about the concept of using multiple languages in workplaces in general, and then move on to the specific objectives of the study, the methodology adopted, and analysis of the data before I end with a summary of the findings. To begin with, multilingualism in workplace is not a new concept. Multiple studies conducted all over the world show that in cosmopolitan cities and in societies where people who speak different languages do businesses together, they communicate in whichever language necessary. In addition, multinational companies have understood the importance of using multiple languages as it paves way for rich communication. In a service-oriented organization like the one which has been focused in this study, communication can happen with and among three main parties: the customers, staff, and the management. What could be different about the way the management looks at multiple languages is that they might focus on selling their products and use multiple languages as a way to reach out to a wider customer base. Let's look at the different perspectives the management could take in implementing multilingualism. Firstly, they could take decisions on how to implement language policies that shape language use in the company. Some multinational companies prefer a rigid policy of using only English as the business language, while others might choose to be flexible. However, how language is actually used in the workplace is determined by the people involved and the power relations between them. Extensive studies have been conducted on how language use differs based on the interlocutor and the nature of communication. The management could also shape language use by defining the linguistic landscape of the office in terms of posters, name boards, and notices displayed. The focus of this study is to analyze how the management utilizes digital space like social media platforms to define its identity and to shape the language behavior of those who share the same space. Now, moving on to the specific objectives of the study. This study attempts to understand how the management of a company utilizes the digital linguistic landscape to create its identity and to analyze the co-constructed impact of multilingualism in posts on users in the shared space. Digital Ethnographic Linguistic Landscape Analysis proposed by Malley and Blomet has been used as their methodology matches the nature of this study. This study broadens digital media because online public platform is used to observe language behavior. An ethnographic approach has been taken because the main idea is to understand people's behavior in their natural setting without the interference of the researcher. And it is a study based on the principles of linguistic landscape as the publicly displayed images are being studied. Data was collected in the form of 64 posts with visuals from the company's social media page. Let's look at the overall findings from the data collected. It can be seen that language use has been flexible as different combinations of languages were visible. However, English has been the dominant language as 59% of the images were purely in English. Another 23% used English with local languages, thus bringing in localization of the messages. Sinhala was seen only in 16% of the posts, and the presence of minority languages was at only 2%. But further analysis of the data led to interesting findings as to why and how languages are chosen. Three main themes, namely brand identity, cultural identity, and multilingual shared space, were identified during the analysis. In terms of brand identity, the choice of language was very clear. It was English. 21 out of 23 posts related to product promotion were in English. Not only that, 9 out of 11 posts that featured people using Anglo-American models. In instances where geographical locations were used to show clarity of vision, foreign locations were preferred over Sri Lankan landmarks. In the posters displaying branded items inside the branches, localization was not a priority. However, a clear shift in prominence was seen in terms of cultural identity. As can be seen in the pictures, in a poster indicating a professional event, English has been forefronted. Sinhala has been given the second place and Tamil the third. However, in the New Year message, which is intended to appeal to all customers culturally, English is given third position while Sinhala and Tamil occupies first and second respectively. This shows that language precedence is intentional. A similar trend can be seen in the use of culturally significant symbols like Vesak lantern, bowl leaves, and a girl in traditional attire whenever messages are not for product promotion but to wish the general public. Even in posts showing public messages, ancient tanks and local children can be seen. In a fashion show which promotes peace, local models in batik wearing trilingual t-shirts are visible. This goes to show that any post relating to people in general is designed to cater to their emotions. Use of multilingual shared space captures how the public react for the messages. Mix of languages could be seen for messages targeted towards children. This could reflect the language trend among the younger generation. How organizations' language behavior is reciprocated by the customers is seen in the next two photographs. The words Avurudu and Tata, bearing emotional and cultural meaning, are expressed in Sinhala in an otherwise English message by both the management and the customer. The next two examples show how social media users follow the lead message in terms of using same language, but the popularity of the post wildly varies, indicating a strong preference given to local languages in culturally related themes. In the first post, which is about office opening time, the message is in English and the comment is also in the same language. You can also see that the post hasn't been very popular as it shows only one comment and one share. However, this message about Hoya Day, Sinhala has been used. This post appears to be more popular among the public with an increased number of comments and shares. What's more, the customer also commented in the same language. This goes to show how the initial posts by the management shapes customers' language choice too. In conclusion, the company's attempt to use multiple languages to attract wider customer base has been achieved by creating a balance between English and other languages. English is used for product promotion and to assert authority in the online platform. It's also used to show excellence in the field, whereas other languages are used to create a personal contact with the customers, thus making the company approachable. By using local languages to represent cultural connectivity, the brand stays memorable to the public. This brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much. Now I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, the floor is open for question. I think Tarunya has a hand up. Tarunya, you can go ahead. You're muted though.
Thank you, Ms. Srimali. Hi, Rajeshwari. I just wanted to know is when it comes to brand identity, how did the customers respond? I mean, which language did they choose to comment when it comes to brand identity? Did the brand identity actually determine the customer's choice of language when they are commenting on a social space?
Yes, actually. As a part, this was reflected in the physical space as well as the digital space. Whenever it comes to the brand or the quality of the product that is being sold, English was used by the management and the staff, and the customers really stayed in English as much as possible. Yes, that is what I could observe as well.
Thank you.
Raji, did the company have a language policy as such? Or have there been explicit discussions about language use, speaking, or other forms of communication?
Right. I did ask the management about it. Theoretically, they have a flexible language policy. But in terms of physical representation, English is very dominant. But when staff speak to each other and when they speak to customers, they are very, very flexible.
Right.
I think that's kind of relevant to a different study, not to this one. But I do want to point out one thing you did say. You showed us the pictures of the models and you called them Anglo-American. And I felt that was a little problematic because that's like that's a national identity and that you really don't know if they're British or American, right? But I would rather say you directly call them white models.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's a phenotype that's been addressed there, and it's a very much a physiological kind of appearance that you're looking at, and I don't think we should have a problem saying that. The other question I had though is you pitched this as ethnographic. You pitch your study as ethnographic. I was wondering actually whether Dr. Herath might like to comment on that as well.
That was actually a comment I had. I was going to ask, because I don't know whether Raji would actually have time to elaborate on that, because you call it an ethnographic research done in a digital platform. I mean, for me, what did it look like, Raji? How did this digital ethnography, what does a digital ethnography look like? And that is actually a question I had. If I didn't have time, we do have time for you to elaborate. I was going to ask you even later, because I think this maybe it's something that emerged post-COVID. Can you elaborate on that, Raji?
Okay. So this particular part of the study is part of a larger study, which was a proper ethnographic study conducted for almost 8 months in this organization. And observing their digital behavior was also part of the study.
Okay.
I believe that this is ethnographic because the research, as a researcher, the only thing I did was observe what was happening. The key principle of ethnography is that the research site is not influenced by the researcher. So I think in that sense, and also since this is part of a larger study which was purely ethnographic, I think this is and it matches the principles laid out in by Malley and Plomack of being a digital ethnographic study.
Okay, I think
Yeah.
that sounds interesting. I think I'd like to explore that, because for me, as I think both Dr. Herath and I are
I know. I know. I was really, I think my thinking also stopped after you mentioned the digital ethnography.
Because there is another concept called nethnography, which is very similar to this. But
Okay.
nethnography is where I also become a part of the study, where I comment, I communicate with the
Okay.
customers and the
Like
management.
okay.
Yeah, so that's
So I think
where
you've given us some food for thought, I think, Rajeshwari. So we'll have to go back to our and think about this.
Yeah, I think very important question. Anybody else? And also it's important that you actually ventured into this in a pre-COVID time, because most of us kind of took a plunge into digital modes of doing research post-COVID. Do we have any other questions? Okay, if we don't have, thank you very much, Raj. Very interesting presentation. We'll move on to the next presenter. That's ID 111. That is GKM Vikramaratne, who will be talking about effectiveness of using supplementary material in ESL reading with special reference to Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka. Is the presenter here?
Yes, ma'am, I'm here.
Okay, go ahead.
I am GKM Vikramaratne and I'm working as a visiting lecturer in Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka. The topic of my research is the effectiveness of using supplementary materials in ESL reading with special reference to Sabaragamu University of Sri Lanka. As we all know, in the second language reading environment, the students should be provided with supplementary materials for the enhancement of the reading skills. The teachers and the educators adapt books, the storybooks, novels, articles, magazines, newspaper articles, and other extra books as supplementary reading materials apart from their main course book. So, the current study has shed the focus on the effectiveness of the use of supplementary reading materials, giving special reference to the higher education structure in Sri Lanka. So, the research was done in relation with 41st year undergraduates in the Faculty of Management Studies in Sabaragamuwa University of Sri Lanka. They belong to the Department of Accountancy and Finance Management, and these undergraduates are required to follow Business English 1 and Business English 2 courses in the first and second semesters respectively. These course units are compulsory course units and they have 6 credits. At the same time, these courses are ESP courses and the learners are provided with students' manuals. The student manual is compiled with lessons correlated in the field of management along with technical jargon. And the manual contains 12 units and all these 12 units cater the 4 skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. So the activities and the exercises are based upon these 4 basic skills. If we pay the attention for reading, each unit contains a business-related paragraph where the students have to read the paragraph and understand. So through this, the students are able to be familiar with the words which are related to the field of management studies. But the issue relying is that whether only these paragraphs are adequate to fulfill the reading skill requirements of the students. Hence, this research was conducted to locate whether the use of supplementary reading materials is effective for the undergraduates in the process of enhancing their reading skills. The central objective of the research was to measure the effectiveness of using supplementary materials in ESL reading. The research problem concentrated by the study was, do the supplementary materials enhance the reading skills of the ESL undergraduates effectively in their reading sessions? So, in order to answer the research problem, the researcher built up the hypothesis that the supplementary reading materials effectively enhance the reading skills of the ESL learners. If the attention is paid for methodology, the data of the study was gathered using quantitative research methodology. A pre-test and a post-test were used in the process of data collection method, and the scores obtained by the students were analyzed. The pre-test was conducted when the supplementary reading materials were less used in the lectures. So, the pre-test contained 10 questions and the time duration for the pre-test was 30 minutes. The pre-test consisted with a paragraph which was related to the field of business and commerce. The students had to read the paragraph and comprehend and answer the questions within 30 minutes. And a treatment had been employed for a period of 3 months, and as the treatment, the researcher instructed the students to read a newspaper article, a business related newspaper article, and write a summary, and the students were given opportunity during the lectures to present the summary of the particular article to the class. At the same time, the students were instructed to maintain a portfolio with the collection of these newspaper articles. After the treatment, the post-test had been conducted. The post-test also consisted with 10 questions and the time duration was 30 minutes. The paragraph included in the post-test was also related to the field of business and commerce. The students had to read the paragraph and answer the questions within 30 minutes. The results obtained by the pre-test and post-test analyzed separately. So, these two tables illustrate the percentage of students who obtains marks for each question separately in the pre-test. The majority of the students were able to score only 1 mark for both MCQ question and the referencing question. For the comprehension question, only 70.5% of students were able to score all 6 marks. Majority of the students, 27.5%, have scored only 2 marks out of 6 marks for the question. By examining the data presented in the two tables, it was clear that the learners were not much familiar with the technical jargon as well as the reading strategies and the techniques. These tables illustrate the marks obtained by the students for the post-test. The post-test was given at the end of 3 months in order to see how the students have improved their reading skills by referring the supplementary reading materials. Above illustrated tables show the scores obtained by the students for the questions in the post-test separately. So, as it shows, the majority of the respondents were able to gain all 4 marks allocated for the MCQ question. For the referencing question also, 62% of students gained 2 marks out of 2 questions. Simultaneously, more than half of students were able to score full marks for the comprehension question. So, the score marks demonstrate the fact that the students practiced the implemented reading activity effectively while enhancing their competencies. The table 6 shows the comparison of mean values of pre-test and post-test. Through these results, it shows the target group scored 4.8 of grade point average for the pre-test and the same group scored 7.5 of grade point average for the post-test, marking a higher value. Table 7 illustrates the comparison of standard deviation of pre-test and post-test. The difference between the two mean values is noted as 2.7 and significantly positive perfection of students has been marked through their performance at the post-test. When the treatment was being done to the students were exposed to the variety of language terms and expressions which are used in the real world, especially in the field of finance and commerce. So, this would let them to grab the technical terms, words as well as the vocabulary from the materials which were used, and they led them to be so familiar with the words. If the attention is paid for the conclusion of the research, the principal persistence of the present study was to measure the effectiveness of proficiency level of the ESL undergraduates when adapting supplementary reading materials for the reading lessons. And as the most rigorous finding of the study, scoring a good grade point average by the learners after the treatment can be depicted. This particular study will inspire and persuade the students to learn the second language since the supplementary materials make lessons more interactive, where it breaks the convention of traditional classroom environment and drive to the autonomous learning atmosphere. So the learners are exposed to an abundant pool of new words and new terms. As the recommendations, if the lecturers are accommodated with the needful facilities, particularly adequate time allocation, extreme output can be achieved. And the lecturers should provide a pleasant environment to use supplementary materials since the learners are provided lesser chances to be exposed to real language elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Kumari. Do we have any questions?
Can I just go
ahead.
first then?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a bit of a tough question. What do you consider the limitations of this study?
You mean the study, ma'am?
Yeah, what are the limitations, do you think? What would you say
I just take the quantitative value and I didn't ask the perception of the students, the use of these supplementary materials. And further, I didn't pay my attention for the perception of lecturers as well. Only their competences have been valued.
Right. And I was just wondering, you haven't also used a control group, right?
No, yes.
Yeah, I think you've identified definitely there are, because I think it's interesting what you've tried to do using the, and it's probably had an effect. But whether you can say it with such a lot of certainty, I don't know, because you don't have a control group, nor do you have qualitative measures. Could you also explain a little bit about what you mean by grade point average here? Because I was a little confused by that.
I took all the marks of the students and divide and take the mean value.
Marks for each part of this of the paper.
No,
I
ma'am.
guess.
Total marks of the students to take the average of the class.
Okay, and you're marking out of 10, is it?
Yes.
Okay, right. Okay,
All
so it's
marks.
not grade point average. I think you would just say the
It's
average
marks.
mark. Yeah,
It's marks. GPA means something
a little
much
different
bigger,
because
much
it's almost like a weighted average with the GPA. So this is just a simple average, actually. Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Anybody else? So basically, what's your conclusion, Kumari?
Ma'am, I'm Kumari.
Kumari, sorry. Yes.
The conclusion is the students are very interested in engaging these types of activities within the class. The basic problem that we have is the less number of hours that we have to do. And I have to give them the chance to present as well in the class. And was really enthusiastic in presenting these summaries. And as far as I can, I marked their portfolios as well. So what I believe is if the time is permitted, it will be very useful for these students to engage in these types of activities since they are exposed to real world language.
Couldn't it also have been the novelty factor, Kumari? Like whenever you do an intervention, even we are pumped up, we are excited, and we also have that anticipation. Couldn't that have been a factor? That's one. The other thing is, what do you do in the class for reading? That's another question I have, because your intervention for me is more or less what you would have to do in a language class, right? I mean, in terms of reading, what is the common practice? Because what you're introducing is not something that new. Did we freeze or did she freeze?
I think there's an internet issue, no? Yeah. Let's see.
Let's give her a couple of minutes.
Yeah. I think, Kumari, you're back, right? Okay.
You're back. Yeah. Go on.
Ma'am, were you asking about the common practice that we used to do during the class? Okay, normally I ask the students to have a loud reading, and then I'll ask them to do the exercises. And after they have done the exercises, I discuss what is there in the paragraph and then go for the answers.
Okay.
So if I understood right, you actually got them to do this extra reading outside the classroom and then come and present it in class. So there's something extra.
As a homework, yes.
Oh, I would really recommend, personally, I think that you do a small qualitative study of this, because that's where the value of this intervention is, in kind of really seeing how it had an impact on the students. So I'm glad that you also realized that was a limitation from what you've done. So best of luck, try it again, and don't forget to have your reflections and the students' interviews and stuff like that. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a wake-up call for you to kind of change what you're already doing in class also, because very often we have textbooks that really don't work. So your practice could be your intervention. Right? Okay, thanks, Kumari.
Very much, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Let's move on to our next presenter. That's ID 113. That's Tarunya Subramaniam. She is going to be talking about the importation of cross-cultural elements to negotiate alienated target culture in an English literature classroom. Over to you, Tarunya.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to look into the topic of importation of cross-cultural elements to negotiate alienated target culture in an English literature classroom. Paper ID 113. This is presented by Ms. Tarunya Subramaniam.
Topic choice. In an English language classroom, while the language teachers were trying to teach multiple alienated literary texts, the students from upper schools who are from multi-socio-cultural settings expressed a lack of familiarity and resistance in perceiving the target language cultures. Fascinatingly, in such language situations, I observed that the teachers who are from differentiating settings imported other strange language and cultural elements to convey the target language effectively, and they tried to co-construct knowledge via meta talks, constructive discussions, as well as criticism. Research questions. First, what are the challenges faced by the teachers in dealing with diversified culture representations in both spoken and written discourse in the English literature classroom? Second, how does the importation of new cultural information mediate the tensions created by the alienated target culture found in the English literature textbooks? Research objectives. To find out the limitations teachers have to deal with as a daily reality in conveying diversified literary texts both in spoken and written discourse in a multicultural classroom within the Sri Lankan context. Second, to notice the effectiveness of applying alienated cultural content to discuss another alienated target culture to the students belonging to the multicultural socio setting. Methodology. An ethnographic research design has been adopted because this approach facilitates the identification of English teachers' perspectives and insights individually to detect the many limitations faced by them while teaching the diversified written discourse in the English literature classroom. Pilot interviews were done initially with an intention of finding out the authenticity and comprehensibility of the interview schedule. Subsequently, final full-fledged interviews were undertaken for 2 participants from upper school with a duration of 40 to 60 minutes. In addition, 24 classroom observations and 15 analytical memos were also recorded. Literature review. According to Davidshvili 2017, she says that English as a second language does not limit itself merely to the attainment of phonology, morphology, lexicology and syntax, but it also embeds target culture accumulation and caters to the cultural consciousness within the students. Vygotski's social cultural theory says that internalization of culture and language is necessary to promote academic success in the long run. Orangi 2012 expresses that cultural mediators must shed light on detailing even the small cultures which are invisible and not easily noticeable by the students alone to promote culture embedded learning in the ESL classroom. Hafner 2012 recommends classroom practitioners must apply numerous brainstorming techniques and scaffolding methods to negotiate these cultural clashes and to explore the third space which prevails within the classroom context. The conflicts which exist within the classrooms can be resolved by both students and teachers through collaborative discussions about multiple social spaces and histories. Rodriguez 2012 point out through survey results which showed that only 46% of authentic materials and 41% of lecture methods of presenting the target culture did not convey the cultural content successfully, as these methods lacked in-depth cultural understanding. But the use of co-constructed interactions of diversified cultures and application of digital resources with more prolific effects. Findings and discussions. Clara, the upper school English literature teacher, discussed the Western ideologies such as living together, the Western lifestyle which was projected in the Indian novel The Vendor of Sweets. The teacher engaged in qualitative discussions on the related topic by drawing in example from Hollywood star couples such as Brad Pitt, Angelina Jolie, Chris Hemsworth, Elsa Pataki, who are living together.
The teacher imported a new alienated concept of food binding, a Chinese traditional practice, to discuss another alienated concept such as Russian society and the women's emancipation and status during the times of Chekhov. Clara was discussing the novel The Vendor of Sweets. She came across Jagan's food habit of consuming margosa flowers fried in ghee once a week. She instantly used the term Vadakam, which was pertaining to Jaffna table, and discussed about this word's origin and the cultural significance. Clara, while discussing the short story The Nightingale and the Rose, which was written by Oscar Wilde, related it to Shakespeare's play Romeo and Juliet. Clara discussed the polytheist religious ideologies in relation to Hinduism in the Indian novel, and the students contributed to the conversation by relating in examples from Buddhism in relation to worshipping of gods, naming them, and some of the religious practices. Bhagya, an upper school English literature teacher, while discussing about women's emancipation, referred to the examples of women who are driving vehicles in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Furthermore, she also cited the examples of Malala and Benazir Bhutto and their achievements in relation to Islamic women's status in Sri Lankan society. Findings. This qualitative study shows to us whenever the teacher came across alienated target cultural concept, they made use of cross-cultural references, and at times they even imported new cultural examples to illustrate and to explain the alienated target culture content. Majority of the teachers created schematic connection to cultural information they have come across in relation to food habit, lifestyle, traditional practice, belief system, and even popular media entertainment. Use of relatable cross-cultural examples and new cultural information to teach alienated target culture effectively without much effort. In a nutshell, it becomes clear to us that even though the target culture itself is an alienated culture to our native students, the importation of other target culture references has become a valuable teaching resource. It even makes language learning an interesting and an enjoyable experience to remember. And these are the references. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tarunya. Do we have any questions for Tarunya?
I thought I'd be a little quiet to see if anyone gives somebody
I know
else
that's
a
what I
chance.
thought. It's not it's just you and me. Do we have any other questions from any of the participants here?
I do. It's not a question, but I didn't understand the term she used, so I would like to know what she meant by that term. In her findings and discussion, she mentioned the teacher engaged in qualitative discussion. I didn't understand what it actually meant. Is it possible to clarify what qualitative discussion means? Tarunya?
Your mic is off, Tarunya.
Thank you for the question. Basically, what happens is normally whenever in the observation, what I have observed is whenever the teacher was explaining something which was very familiar, she never paused. She just ran across it. But whenever she came to, let's say, an alienated topic, and when she was importing another alienated content to describe or discuss on it, she tended to waste a lot of time. Sometimes they didn't even realize it. It can even get to like 15, 20, sometimes the whole rest half an hour, because they were so deviated and they brought in so many qualitative discussions in. So I found that the time they allocated for these kind of imported new examples, especially from outside a different culture, they wasted or spent, or let's say they felt it was necessary to give more elaborations and more discussion on those areas. So this is something which was quite interesting to see, because they did not apply or spend same amount of qualitative time when it comes to an example which was relating to a local context. So they were actually carried away. That's the right term I would use there, probably informally.
Why do you think that happened, Tarunya? I mean,
As an
getting carried
observer,
away.
as an observer or as being in the part of the school system, ma'am, the common feature is, being as a part of a teacher as well, I feel that it happens because we tend to feel that alienated examples need to be explained more.
Yeah.
This is our assumptions and our perceptions, but we don't need to, because actually students themselves have a schematic knowledge about those things, but we tend to think in that way and we tend to elaborate it more simplified.
So that's more
The
of a
perceptions
teacher
on
issue.
the teacher's point of view.
Right, it's a teacher issue.
Yes,
And
teacher's point of view.
also, one other question, I'll let somebody else talk later. I mean, why do you call it alien culture? Is that what it's referred to in the literature, or is that something that emerged out of your analysis?
Yeah, because the students, specifically the students I was observing was the grade 9s. Because in this particular context, the school, they are starting the literature 1 year ahead, rather than they should actually start it in grade 10, but they have started it in grade 9 itself. It's a management's decision. So when they have started it, what happens is, like, for example, these Russian novels and food binding concepts of Hinduism and Buddhism in depth have been brought out in the materials taught in the classroom. And students who belongs to the Islamic context, they do not have an idea about it, because they tend to say haram initially, because they find a pluralistic ideology is a bit contrastive to their own ideology. So actually the teacher has to, first of all, try to negotiate in making them understand about the concept of pluralistic ideology by bringing in lots and lots of outside materials, which some of the students, they don't agree with, whereas the others are just listeners probably. This is something which was observed.
So the terminology is yours, the alien.
Yeah, because I found especially as the novels and the materials being used was from a different context, and even though Hinduism and Buddhism is something which is very relatable to us, I found a particular set of group, they are not much aware about pluralistic ideologies of religions.
Okay, are there any other questions? Mihri, did you have another question?
Yeah, just a small question, because you mentioned this food binding thing. So this is a concept that the teacher brings in, right? It's not actually in the book.
Yes.
Yeah, but another thing, this food binding thing is also very problematic, right? It's xenophobic. I think that's the word for it, because it's kind of a colonial kind of way of it's derogatory. Actually, I believe. I'm just reaching from some knowledge that I have. So do you think the teachers also need to be a little more aware of the kind of, examples that they're bringing into the class? Because
maybe
it's also kind of stereotypical kind of thinking that we're also,
maybe the teacher who brought this out, Mihri, she herself, during the informal discussions with me, when I did ask about it, she said to me that she herself is coming from, let's say, a social cultural background where she has limitations. So I think she feels that bringing out an example from an equally, deprived or, let's say, women restricted society, and then to bring to speak about them coming out of that practice was a way of her expressing herself.
But I think the bigger question, I'm really not asking you, I'm asking whether we should, as teachers, ask ourselves, like, whether we also need to question our assumptions about these sort of mythical almost things, and whether we are just perpetuating stereotypes in the effort to expose people to different cultures. I don't know. Yeah, it's just something that was like sort of bothering me. That's all. Yeah.
I think your presentation raised, we are left with more questions, which is very good, very good, because we are left wondering about many things, assumptions that we make in a language classroom. So, and also I think personally for me also, in terms of the kind of terminology that I think Nadira has her hand up, right? Nadira, go ahead.
Yeah.
I just actually wanted to sort of continue what Dr. Srimali was asking Tarunya about this the sort of like using the term alienated target culture. Are you like? Did you find it, like as Dr. Srimali said, was it in the literature as well when you were looking it up? Or because I know you said you sort of used the fact that the students themselves were sort of couldn't sort of relate to the concepts spoken about in the classroom.
Yeah.
But were you able to find something like that in the literature also?
Yes.
In terms of
For example, Ms. Radhira, one of the prominent factor was when it comes to The Vendor of Sweets, which is an Indian novel, there is which is written by R.K. Narayan. There's a portion where they talk about the goddess Kali's the physical qualities as well as each and every functions and how it is actually portrayed to the world, which was very in-depth because interestingly, I being a Hindu, I myself am not very thorough with that concept. So especially when it was taught to the student who was coming from a particular socio-cultural background, they could not grasp it. So that is where this, it was very in-depth where, the students could not follow it up. So at one point,
positioned it as alien.
Yeah. So at one
I
point,
think when Nadira said literature, she meant like in the not in your readings.
Actually being used in the classroom, I was referring to that.
Okay. No, I mean like theoretically, did you come across it being positioned as alien in any kind of?
Depending on the context, because at the end of the day, I've noticed that the management was telling in some meetings to skip these portions while being handled, not to go in detail in relation to other religious, let's say, discussions in depth. This was actually being said. So this is something I don't know whether it's right to say it or not. That's the second part of discussion. But as the teacher, when she was bringing it out also, she said she was not very happy about going in depth with certain religious concepts. So I'm just leaving it.
Oh, so I think the question is with the terminology, isn't it, Nadira?
Yeah, that was the question, but it's okay. I mean, it's still fascinating, sort of the fact that you've looked at it in this way. I wonder if the material was, if it was, I don't know, if it was more targeting progress, because there's a lot of literature with progressive Islamic communities and sort of based in even within I think there was a Netflix series on a bunch of teenage girls from it was very interesting. So I was thinking maybe if the teachers were teaching something that came from at least a similar socio-religious background, but still had very progressive tones, if the students would react more. But yes, my original question was about the terminology, mostly relating to the theoretical background. When you read it, were you able to find something similar? But yeah.
Okay, thank you for the question, and thank you, Tarunya, for the very interesting presentation and also the discussion. Let's go on to the next presentation. Actually, there are a couple of presenters. It's ID 175. We have W. K.N. Udara, CM Arsakula Surya, and GGC Madhushika, who are talking about a critical evaluation of use of native English speaker audio clips and non-English speaker audio clips in ESL classrooms in the University of Kelaniya. Over to you.
Welcome to the presentation titled The Critical Evaluation of Use of Native English Speaker Audio Clips and Non-Native English Speaker Audio Clips in ESL Classroom in the University of Kelaniya, presented by W. K.N. Udara, CM Arsakula Surya, and GGC Madhushika. The content of the presentation: introduction, literature review, methodology, findings and discussion, conclusion, recommendations, and references. Introducing the study is a quantitative research incorporating research participants, and it relates to teaching English as a second language and listening comprehension. It stems from the fact that improvement of fresh undergraduates' listening skills are a priority in ESL courses in higher education institutes. ESL lecturers frequently use audio materials to develop listening comprehension skills, and the audio materials usually used in ESL classroom can be divided into two categories. They are audio materials featuring native English speakers or speakers who speak English as a first language, and non-native English speakers or speakers who use English as a second language. Usually, the teachers in Sri Lanka fall under the category of second category, as they speak English as a second language, whereas their mother language is either Sinhalese or Tamil. This study aimed to comparatively analyze the use of these two types and the efficiency of these two types of materials. In reviewing the literature, this study stems from Krushen's comprehensible input theory in 1985, where he argues learners will only learn through comprehensible input. It also relates to Philipson's native English speaker fallacy, in which he criticizes the taken for granted superiority of native English speakers. In terms of research design and research methodology, this study is pretty much similar to Arabani et al.'s study in 2009, where they looked at the use of native materials as well as non-native materials, and their argument is non-native materials were more effective in enhancing listening comprehension of the participants. In addition to that, a study done in 2013 by Priyangoda Abeyvikram showed that the variety of English or accented speech is immaterial on test takers' performance on a listening test for academic purposes. To continue the presentation, I would like to invite my colleague Netmi over to you.
Thank you, Chandula. So when it comes to the methodology, first the sample was selected. As the sample, 52 first-year undergraduates from the Department of Fine Arts of University of Kelaniya were selected. All the selected undergraduates will belong to UTEL Benchmark 6 category from the English Placement Test. Next, the consent was taken. The students were then divided into two groups as the control and the experimental group. Each group had 26 students. Next, a Michigan test was conducted to make sure that there are no significant differences existed between the proficiency level of the students of the two groups. Then a pretest was conducted. Pretest was followed by a treatment period of 2 months covering 16 hours in 8 sessions. During the treatment period, multiple listening activities were done using native English speaker audio clips and non-native English speaker audio clips for the experimental group and the control group, respectively. Then a post-test was conducted, and then the marks of the both pre-test and the post-test was analyzed using SPSS 25.0 software. Now let's look at the findings. The first two histograms, as you can see, show the distribution of marks of the pre-test and the post-test of the experimental group. According to the graphs, the mean and the median of the pretest is 8.88 and 8.0, while in the post-test it is 9.12 and 8.0. The next two histograms show the distribution of the marks of the pre and the post-test of the control group. According to the graphs, the mean and the median values of the pretest and the post-test are 8.88 and 8.0, while the mean and the median of the post-test is 11.19 and 10.0. In both the scenarios, the post-test graphs show the post-test graphs are more right-skewed than the pre-test, which means there is a development in both the post-test, which shows the effectiveness of the treatment period. As both the post-test shows a development, another test was run to identify which group shows the significant development in their marks. According to the statistical formula of significant difference, if the p-value is less than or equal to 0.05, it says that the p-value shows a significant difference. Therefore, to test the significant difference, a paired sample t-test was conducted. As you can see, the p-value of the pair 1, which is the experimental group, is 0.687 and it is greater than 0.05. This implies there is no significant development in the post-test marks of the students of the experimental group. Moreover, when we are looking at the pair 2, which is the control group, the p-value is 0.001 and that is less than 0.05. Thus, it implies that there is a significant difference of the post-test marks of the control group. Next, box plots were plotted for the post-test marks of the control group and the experimental group to further prove the point. According to these graphs, the median of the control group is 10 and the median of the experimental group is 8. And the box plots of the control group is significantly righter skewed than the box plots of the experimental group. Moreover, the box plots of the control group is higher than the experimental group and the majority of the students of the control group falls into the upper quartile of the graph. This indicates that the students improved their listening skills when the non-native English speaker audio clips were used. Next, I invite Chamali to continue the presentation.
In conclusion, the data analysis of the study proves that the use of non-native English speaker audio clips is more effective than native speaker audio clips. It identified that pragmatic relevance to the suprasegmental features of speech, such as tone, pitch, and intonation in non-native English speaker audio clips as one of the main reasons for the effectiveness of non-native English speaker audio clips. As for the other main reason, native English accent failed to contribute for the improvement of L2 learners' listening comprehension because through the comparison, it suggests that the sample tend to improve their listening skills when non-native English speaker audio clips are used. So it's clear that the L2 listeners have less difficulty in understanding L2 words spoken by a speaker whose L1 is as same as that of the students. Therefore, this challenges the global trend on employing native English speaking teachers as ideal candidates to teach listening skills and to record listening materials using native English speakers' voice. In order to empower non-native English speaking teachers, certain recommendations are made at the end of the study, in that their confidence should be developed to teach English as an international language, as the study validates the claim that native speakers' accent is not superior to non-native speakers' accent. For that, ESL teachers need to understand the students' basic linguistic abilities in developing listening materials. In terms of further research, extensive research studies incorporating trial ESL students are recommended to be done in the future, since the present study incorporated ESL students in a higher education institute where the findings cannot be generalized. These are the sources we referred in making the study, and that is the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions for that? Can you all put your videos on, Nudara, Madhushika, and Chamali?
I think they have, yeah.
Okay.
I have loads of questions, but let the others
I
talk
think
first.
you should hold on, Mihri. I think you should hold on. I think we have both of us have the same question. Okay, anybody else? Any
Speak
questions?
now. Okay, I'm going to go for it.
Go ahead. Okay.
So yeah, I actually found this very interesting. I think that was a very interesting presentation as well. But my big question is, how did you categorize or how did you identify recordings as native speaker or non-native speaker? Like, how did you do that? Yeah, your mics are all off. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Basically, we downloaded materials from YouTube featuring
Okay.
native speakers, and then they were, I mean, audio, the same content was used, audio
Right.
by our colleagues. Yes.
Okay. So you got the same content, like you got the transcript, and you had like, so your native speakers, how did you like, can you give me a couple of examples?
There were 8 teams,
Mm-hmm.
very broad teams, like meeting new people and stay connected. And then
So these are like
No,
British
that's not
videos.
the question, Chandul. I think the question is, who is a native speaker?
Yeah.
A person who would speak English as their first language.
Okay. So when you had the recordings done by your colleagues, they were all second language speakers of English.
Yeah.
Okay. Big question. Would you consider myself, Dr. Srimali, as second language speakers or first language speakers?
I think I know that's a tricky question, but
yes, it is.
No, it's not a tricky question, Chandula. It's not a tricky question, because I think the second sentence in your presentation was very problematic, because you said Sri Lankans are second language speakers of English, and which really problematizes a lot of things, because I think there would be many people here, maybe yourself included, I don't know how you identify yourselves, who are actually first language speakers of English. I think what we need to understand is that we actually embrace a different variety of English, and that we are first language speakers and not second language speakers. And many of us are actually first language speakers of multiple languages, because we are fluent users. So I think one of the things, and this is coming from me as an older person who has lived longer, is I think you really need to rethink your basic definition of your presentation as to who because we are actually taking the debate 20 years back, Chandula, when you position a first language speaker as somebody American or wherever, whereas we are first language speakers. Your fluency is a first language speaker's fluency. Anyway.
You might like to think of repositioning it as, and very clearly what you have really differentiated between is an international form of English versus SLE, because you've got Sri Lankans too who are, practicing users of English who obviously speak Sri Lankan English. So that might be what you're really arguing, that our locals are our way of speaking is something much more accessible to students and helps them with their listening comprehension, which is a very valid finding. And actually, I know that both your reviewers are very happy with your paper. I think you've done a really solid job. It's just that this is my pet area as well. So I actually fight this, because if our definition of a first language or native speaker is that they are first language speakers, then the fact that I'm brown or Sri Lankan shouldn't be a bar to me being a native speaker of English. If you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, so I get the point. I get the point.
Yes. So that this is my personal one thing, but I think your studying in itself is interesting. I think also very valid to help us also realize, okay, for listening, should we be thinking more in the line of getting clips from people, Sri Lankans, and that will actually help our students with improving their listening comprehension. I think that's a very valid finding as well, and some food for thought for myself.
And also for confidence to know that a fluent use of the language is somebody who looks and sounds just like the kind of people we meet day to day. Because studies have been done in first language countries like America and England, where they show a picture of a person talking in different people who look phenotypically different, talking in different varieties. And the moment you see the person, the speaker forms a certain kind of a perception. This one speaks correct English, this one is not. So when you frame kind of a first and second language the way you did, I was kind of saddened, because we took the debate 20 years before, maybe before you were born. Also, these discussions we had. We've come a long way since then, but pick up from the point where you're talking about varieties of English. From that point of view, your study is very important, because we see fewer and fewer people studying the skills, the core skills of teaching language. We are moving, the pendulum has swung to a point we are looking at identity, ideology, and other kind of abstract issues, and not so much the how do we really get this business done, right? So in that point, your study is very important, because listening is a skill that is really overlooked. We take for granted. So well done. Anyway, other people open for questions. If not, Mihri and me are like dominating every presentation.
No, we gave time.
Hello.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm Dr. Saminda, Dr. Shrimali.
Yes.
And shall we use modern techniques like in the science we use different software to analyze the frequency and all that. If we make this clip and make a different approach, like how to pronounce it, and then the frequency levels, and how to it can be incorporated in the science, that biology and the physics, and it will be as a it's like a measurable thing. It's my idea for in
maybe
future
you
study.
can come in the pair up with Chandula and take it a step further, your study, because those are not ways in which, at least I'm not familiar, and I haven't done language analysis or language learning in that way, but that is definitely very doable. That's quite possible.
Yeah, because we are normally do the bird call analysis like that. The different calls has different frequencies and different the patterns.
Yeah.
If that kind of thing, we can incorporate those things, and we can see if there is any difference between the native speakers and all that.
Yeah, that's varieties, and even within Sri Lanka we have different varieties, right? And that variety could either take you a long way or kind of make you immobile. That's how powerful varieties are. Anyway, any other questions before we go on to the last speaker?
Hi, I'm Tilini.
Tilini, no? Yes, Tilini,
Yes.
go ahead.
Yeah, not a question, actually, just a comment, and congratulations, all of you. That was a very interesting presentation. Just talking from my personal experience, I mean, while trying to write material and also, I mean, trying to use the written material in the classrooms, I have also felt that, you know, it's good to have something from our context, something that is easier for the students to understand. But I think that also takes us to a practical constraint where we don't have like enough material recorded by, you know, Sri Lankan speakers. So if we are like, usually we turn to YouTube and we sometimes go for these Indian speakers, you know, because it's pretty much closer to, you know, the way we pronounce. But actually, you know, it's very frustrating to look for material online when we actually want to use something that our students understand. So I think that kind of calls the need to, you know, maybe prepare. I mean, if we really think that we should use material, you know, listening, I mean, recordings recorded by Sri Lankans, or if we think that our students should be, you know, able to understand, that we should use, you know, things like recorded by, you know, Sri Lankan speakers, then, you know, there's a need to create material, maybe, which takes time and effort. So, you know, material writing cannot be done overnight. So, you know, it takes a lot of effort and time. So that's what I've been like experiencing so far. Yeah, so very nice presentation. Thank you.
Okay. I think even Nadira had her hand up.
Yeah, but it was just like sort of connected in the way that I think I just, also very interesting study. And I think as we discussed, sort of the premise maybe is problematic in terms of how you all were framing native speaker and all that. But I think you all are also addressing this sort of obsession Sri Lankans have with this sort of heavily accented fake spoken English classes. I think maybe that was something you all were addressing also. And it's very good to sort of see research showing up that says that that learners of English actually appreciate Sri Lankan English coming from their own speakers, as opposed to sort of this sort of fake sort of elocution versions that we see, and it's still very popular, unfortunately, in Sri Lanka. So maybe that's something that it's very interesting. I think if you sort of change the premise and go ahead with this, there's a lot of scope.
Exactly. I think one thing you all need to pick on is each of the comments that came actually directs different ways in which you can take this research further: varieties, identity, material development, perceptions, and also getting us to think of ourselves as English language speakers and educators. So excellent presentation. Very good. And you all, as I said, touched on an area that we are increasingly moving away from, but is very, very important because we really ignore listening. So thank you, everybody. We are moving on.
Thanks a lot, ma'am, for this opportunity. See you. Nice day.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
I don't think we have other questions. So let's go on to the final speaker for today. That's ID 209, Tilini Gunatilaka. She's going to be talking about, her presentation is titled, Students Must Be Hating Me, Identity Formation of a Novice University Lecturer in English Language in the Face of the Pandemic. Over to you, Tilini.
Greetings, everybody. Students must be hating me. My study is titled Identity Formation of a Novice University Lecturer in English Language in the Face of the Pandemic. First, we'll take a look at the concept of identity. Identity was previously viewed as a singular, fixed, stable, and decontextualized attribute that is fairly independent from its context. But this perception has changed, and identity is viewed as a dynamic, ongoing, and performative process. So according to Norton, it is the way a person understands his or her relationship to the world, how that relationship is constructed across time and space, and how the person understands possibilities for the future. So Barkhuizen, who specifically focuses on language teacher identity, states that language teacher identities are being and doing, feeling and imagining, and storing. They are struggle and harmony. They are contested and resisted by self and others. They are also accepted, acknowledged, and valued by self and others. They are core and peripheral, personal and professional. They are dynamic, multiple, and hybrid, and they are foregrounded and backgrounded. According to Weinman, through several teachers who enter a teaching career, the confrontation with the complexities and responsibilities of a classroom appear to provoke a form of a reality shock. This transition from a student teacher to an actual classroom teacher puts the teacher's beliefs and ideas about teaching to test. So this reality shock takes a different form with the revolution that has taken place in the field of education in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, with no exception to the field of English language teaching. So this study focuses on the context of a state university in Sri Lanka, which has adopted the distance mode of education during the pandemic. It intends to explore how the change in the educational platform from physical to virtual has influenced the identity formation of a novice English lecturer. And I expect to pay more attention to understand how the novice lecturers imagined identity, the identity constructed in the imagination about the relationship between oneself and other people, and about the things in the same time and space with which the individual nevertheless has virtually no direct interaction, is negotiated or transformed in response to the novice lecturer's novel role as an online teacher. Now I will focus on the methodology. The study focused on one novice lecturer in English language attached to the Department of English Language Teaching at the State University of Sri Lanka. And she's identified by the pseudonym Hiruni. She's a lecturer in English with about 9 months of experience at a state university. She has embarked on her career on a temporary basis after the outbreak of the pandemic and has been engaged in online teaching from the beginning itself. So this is a qualitative study intended to collect highly subjective data leading to an in-depth analysis to explore the identity of a novice English lecturer. It adopted a qualitative inquiry, a narrative inquiry approach, and the data collection was carried out using interviews as conversations, where the participant was encouraged to share rich experiences with the researcher. So according to Clandine and Kane, narrative inquiry involves understanding and making meaning of individuals' experiences over time and in context. So this facilitated answering the research questions of this study, which are: how does the participant perceive herself as a lecturer in English, and how have her perceptions been negotiated by her professional practices during the pandemic? The data were analyzed taking a thematic approach, employing the 2-cycle coding method. And accordingly, during the first cycle, the codes and labels that assign meaning to the descriptive or inferential information were identified, and the emergent themes were identified during the second cycle. Moving on to the results and the discussion. The data analysis of this study develops along a few perceptual strands of the novice English lecturer, and those are the emerging themes of Hiruni's narrative. Moreover, it is clear that these themes lead to a juxtaposition of the imagined and practiced English lecturer identity in the context of the global pandemic. The first is facilitator versus traditional teacher. Hiruni had imagined herself as a teacher who interacts a lot with students and creates an environment for student-centered learning. She had visualized herself as a facilitator who ensures that maximum student engagement takes place in the classroom. Interestingly, she had wanted to, clearly distinguish herself from the traditional teacher who, as she sees, comes to the class, teaches whatever that is in the syllabus or textbook to be done with what is in the book or syllabus. However, this one-way communication associated with the role of the traditional teacher, which she had previously rejected, has now become a reality within her own role due to the nature of online teaching. And students who are generally less responsive, even in a physical classroom, have turned to be completely mute during their online classes. And Hiruni says it takes about the first 10 minutes for her to make sure that the students can hear me, showing the nature of the one-way communication in her classroom. Coming to student-teacher rapport, according to Stein and Newfield, meaning making is constantly in flux as learners make signs in response to other signs in a never-ending relation of initiation and responsiveness, arising out of their interests in the social context of power in which the meanings are being made. So Hiruni had visualized herself as an extremely approachable teacher. She says, I wanted my students to feel free to reach out to me whenever they have problems with regard to what they learn. However, the use of an online platform for teaching has resulted in a very distant relationship with her students. And students' response to her request to turn on their cameras has been appalling. She says, they send me text messages saying their cameras, the camera isn't working. And according to her, it feels like dealing with an unknown community, and her students are strangers to her. The passive existence of her student community, which she wanted to be actively engaged in classroom activities, has resulted in a sense of uncertainty in her with regard to her performance as a teacher. In a physical classroom, the teacher would notice if your face is blank, and she might repeat herself and, help you to understand, even if you don't tell her that you don't understand. It is clear that the physical appearance of students greatly helps the teacher to see herself and her performance to the student response. And the online platform greatly limits it. So as Barkhuizen says, identities are accepted, acknowledged, and valued by the self and others. But the novice English lecturer here, in this case, remains uncertain of how she is perceived by others. Others in the sense her students, due to the lack of multimodal resources, such as gestures and facial expressions that help her make meaning. Coming to self-presentation and the impression created in the students, as a novice teacher embarking on her career, Hiruni seeks to develop her own unique professional identity. And she has been immensely influenced by her favorite teachers or lecturers. And she says, I'd really like if my students get the kind of image or impression I got about them. However, as she says, the absence of the interaction and intimacy she has had with her teachers, has narrowed her space to create a positive impression in the minds of her students. So Hiruni thinks that her students only know her as someone who sends the Zoom link to the online lectures in advance and delivers the lecture. She assumes that the fact that the students find the online lectures monotonous and difficult has made them hate her. So she thinks that these students must be hating me when they receive the link, and I really don't think that they like me. So her personality, preferences, and even the appearance remain vague to the students. She thinks we can still create an impression. She says you can still create an impression while being yourself. It is, if it is your thing to wear crumpled shirts, you can wear them and go to the class and be yourself. But I can't say what I would have done because I really did not get the chance to do what I would have wanted to do. So her struggle to develop a more complete identity and the restrictions created by the virtual mode of teaching have been brought to light here. So I come to the conclusions of this study. The study concludes that the virtually supported English teaching environment requires significant identity negotiation, and this process involves a complex struggle. And also it emphasizes that more student engagement and feedback are required to facilitate identity formation, as identities are accepted, acknowledged, and valued by self and others. And also, it shows that the absence of limited presence of multimodal resources such as dress, gestures, and physical bearing for the purpose of self-presentation impacts the process of identity formation negatively. So based on the conclusions, this study recommends that it is required to build a support system for the novice English lecturers entering online teaching in order to enable them to see themselves in a more positive light. So here are the references that I have used in my study. Thank you very much for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Tilini. I think your talk is about something that almost all of us are going through since we are all teaching online, very anonymous context. Are there any questions? I think most of us can relate to what Tilini is talking about in varying degrees.
Dr. Srimali, I don't have a question, but well, probably a question. Like you rightly said, we all can associate with the study to certain in different degrees. Uh, Towards the end, when she gave a recommendation of providing a support system for the new teachers, I was wondering if she had some system in mind. What could be a good support system for such people, for such novice teachers?
Okay, thanks for the question, Raji. Actually, one thing that I noticed during this study was, I mean, since the lecturers are new to using an online platform, by the time actually when I collected the data, we were not as familiar as this with using the online platform. So what I noticed was now of course we think of different ways of getting student feedback. Even though students don't talk in the class, we at least we try to send them a Google questionnaire, or you ask them to use the Padlet to give some comments. And we have like started to think of different ways of getting student feedback, even though they don't speak in class. I mean, considering the student numbers in classes, we actually don't get the chance to give them opportunity to talk. So, but the participant has spoken to me in a context where they were not quite familiar, or maybe too new to the online teaching itself. So that is possible. That is possible. Like they can be encouraged to keep in touch with the learners using different other platforms in addition to the 2 hours that they appear online. And also I thought maybe the lecturers or the seniors who are who are mentoring them or guiding them could have like maybe go attend the lectures with them and go through their recordings, give them some feedback on the way they are on the way they are presenting themselves and the content they are using. Because when you're in front of a screen talking to the students and not getting any feedback at all, that kind of leads you to question who you are and what you are doing here. So to avoid that dilemma, I think the staff, the colleagues can also step into help the beginners. That's what I had in mind, Raj.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Do you think this would be different by now, Tilini? Because you said you did this early on in the pandemic, right? The data collection.
Yes. Yes, to a great extent, Dr. Srimali, because as I mentioned earlier, we have now figured out ways of getting student feedback. And also I have noticed that students have become a little bit more comfortable in handling on online platforms. And if it is a university, for instance, we are using the LMS, and also sometimes we can join the students' WhatsApp groups. So things have become a little less formal, so that students can reach us in different ways. So I think the barrier is the distance is not that it's not that serious today when we look at it, because we have figured out ways of reaching out to the students.
Okay.
I think your idea of support for novice teachers, and not necessarily just novice teachers, because in a way we're all novice teachers when it comes to online teaching, is a really good one. In fact, I thought I just mentioned it. I'm supervising a student who is doing a master's thesis on that, where she's got a online community of practice to support the novice teachers. But she had proposed this before COVID came, but it just sort of fit in really well. And it makes a lot of sense. Your recommendation itself, it's actually a very good recommendation.
One last question, Tilini. Now, your title is "Students Must Be Hating Me." Is her perception, or was there evidence to substantiate what she said, or did it come from her sense of insecurity?
It's coming from her sense of insecurity, because she actually is, she's very she's not, she doesn't know what the students are thinking of her. So this is what she thinks. of her students' perception. So this is purely her, these are her words. So she thinks like students see her as a person who sends the Zoom link and conducts a lecture, and she assumes that her lectures are boring for the students. And yeah, this is the kind of perception that she has.
Yeah, I think what you should do is also analyze why she thinks like that, right? I mean, this level of negativity, maybe you can actually do a reflective conversation and see why she actually thought like that, because it could also be the climate in which we work in also doesn't give us much promise, right? There is so much negativity around us, that around all of us. So it's hard to be positive and be engaged and be that happy ESL teacher singing and playing music and playing games. It's very hard. So you need to, I mean, when you're doing narrative studies of this nature, which are extremely subjective and self-reflective, those are factors you need to take into consideration, Tilini. Yeah. In what kind of because a premise of a narrative is also what's the social, political, even the historical context in which the study is situated. Yeah. Because had we had to move to online at a time when there wasn't a pandemic for a different reason, we would see it as a very forward thinking, you know, an experiment which we are going to try out. It's high tech, futuristic. So but now we can't because we are forced into it under different circumstances. Yeah. Are there any questions? And I think Tilini is the last speaker. Do you all have any questions? I think all the speakers are still online. If you all have any questions which you couldn't ask when the presenters ended, you can actually ask that now, because I think all the presenters are still online.
And if I can give a comment to the presentation one before Tilini, that there was a lot of discussion about native speakers and identifying. And when Tilini mentioned that when you are a material writer, you have difficulties in finding local Sri Lankan voices. But I want to look at it from another perspective also. It's a debate between giving the students the knowledge versus giving them more exposure. You probably would want to give students exposure to different dialects and different types or varieties of Englishes in the classroom. And what if that is the situation? What if only Sri Lankan speakers are not enough? How do we balance it then?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And one of the reasons people learn English is also to get that exposure, because it's a gateway to a whole different culture and a world.
Yeah.
Chandula like to respond, because I think I also have a comment on that too.
Okay.
Yeah. But my personal gut feeling is like it's moderate with confidence, right? I mean, if you can do it, of course, exposure and all those terms, but I personally believe, and also it will give you more time to prepare your lesson materials. I personally believe that, like, meaning you are engaged with your own lesson. That is what my personal gut feeling. And to be more, to be more engaged with the lesson, and it will give you certain investment. I mean, you are investing yourself in the lesson as well.
Okay, so that is the order of priority.
I mean, you need to be a good reference point. You can't make, saying that, that also needs to be kept inside your mind, in your mind. Like, you can't throw words, or you have to be a good reference point at the end of the day.
I think I'd like to pick up on what everybody's saying and just point out, when we do pick up videos, we do tend to go for sort of American British accents. But when we think about non-native speaker in that sense, why aren't we picking out, people like Harizo Kyuzan from BBC, who is, I think, Korean. And his accent is very clear, even though he's a BBC presenter. And it's kind of really nice to have that kind of variety as well, like East Asian, African, which is something we don't really expose our students to, I think. I don't know whether I'm making a generalization or an assumption, but I feel that we're not doing that kind of exposing. And I think that's what Rajeshwari is also talking about. Like, it doesn't have to be British or American. We can be exposing students to a variety of accents. That's just a little personal comment,
I think
right?
Tarunya has a hand up as well. Go ahead, Tarunya.
I just wanted to add something to this because coming from a school system, especially from an international school system, the issue is I find that some of the teachers are actually promoted to use RP, and we are actually discouraged from using the native slangs, because most of the, let's say, top management or people who are in power above us, they always recommend us to go with materials which are from foreign context. And I really need to pinpoint that they do not actually prefer native materials being taken into consideration. That's one of the limitations. I think I find it in a Sri Lankan context classroom where, international schools are playing its role. Unfortunately, yeah.
Unfortunately, yes.
Sorry about it, unfortunately.
Yes.
That's not my
Any
personal
other questions. No, that's true, because I think what we are getting is different perspectives from different places in which we are working in.
Yeah.
Any other questions? If not, we can wind up. Okay, then I think with that, we bring this theme ESL, English as a second language, English language teaching, actually, the theme to an end. I think we had a very, very good discussion. I think the good thing about actually having a smaller group of presenters and participants is it's very much intimate, very personal, and everybody gets a voice. So I'm very glad that we got to have this conversation. I would first like to thank our presenters, who actually, all of you had done extensive research, carefully thought about actually how to deliver it. And also each of the presentations highlighted a very crucial aspect of English language teaching, issues that we really encounter, we need to explore further. And I think you all actually provided very rich, nuanced insights into different aspects. There are areas you need to improve as well, but I think there always has to be a starting point. So thank you very much to the presenters. And I think we had a very good balance. Usually we have this very similar kind of presentations one after the other, but I think this time the presentations, they all came from very different places. I mean, from a workplace, from an identity, from a skills point of view, experimental studies, and methodologically also, we had a pretty big range of presenters. So thank you very much for all of you. To the presenters, and also to our participants who were here all this time, asked all these valuable questions, took part in a discussion. Thank you very much for joining us. And from that end, I can't say this end because I'm not at the OU anymore. I would like to thank the team convener, Ms. Mihiri Jans. Being the convener is a huge amount of work, a lot of back and forth, a lot of time, a lot of energy. Thank you, Mihiri, for pulling this together. And also, I think other than Mihiri, there is also the co-chairperson, Dr. Dayangani, who is also involved in the technical aspect. And there's the host, Ms. Ransirini De Silva. And then also from the technical team, there's Mr. Taranga and Mr. Sali as well. Thank you to all of the technical people, assistance team. I don't know what it looks like or where you all are located, but I know it's a very intricate job to make sure everything is lined up properly. And thank you for doing that in a very, very systematic way. And also to the organizers of the conference, who I know have been working for the entire last year. So have a good rest of the day, rest of the conference. And tomorrow we have also our keynote speaker. He's also speaking in a topic on ELT in times of COVID. That's at tomorrow at 9 o'clock. If you can, please join that. If not, take care, stay safe, everybody. Bye.